atomic bomb dropped from the hatch of the Enola Gay, Miyoko Matsubara was watching. On August 6, 1945, she was one of thousands of students constructing fire breaks throughout Hiroshima. She and her friends were collecting roof tiles from demolished buildings when suddenly they heard a B-29 bomber. As Matsubara looked toward the sky, she saw a white streak of vapor marking the path of the plane. Then,
some luminous body dropped from the tails of the plane. It became a big fire ball. Then I flat on the ground. At the same time, I had deafening roar.
Hiroshima Castle, Japan's second military headquarters and a jail for American prisoners of war, is leveled and burned to its foundations. A tranquil Japanese garden is charred beyond recognition. Hiroshima's most fashionable buildings are reduced to rubble. For many, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima symbolized the shocking conclusion of the world's bloodiest war and the frightening advent of the atomic age. But for Hiroshima's survivors, the true horror of the bomb came during the years that followed the blast, as they fought for their lives and struggled to overcome heartbreaking losses. The loss of family, disfigurement, loss of property, and innocence. We'll see how survivors dealt with these losses, built for themselves a future, and how their personal stories continue to influence younger generations today. For these resilient people, the impact of the bomb is eclipsed only by the impact of the choices they made after the cloud lifted. Keiji Nakazawa is a survivor of the atomic bomb. As a writer and cartoonist, his controversial work portrays Hiroshima before the bomb as an oppressive military city. Soldiers returning from conquests in China paraded in the streets. Kamikaze pilots, trained on islands off the coast, prepared for suicidal attacks on the enemies of their emperor.
The people alive then had a century of education and the imperial system. They still believed their emperor descended from God.
With the emperor's support, the war effort dominated civilian life. Children were drilled as disciplined little soldiers. Older children were often taken out of school to work in weapons factories. Boys were groomed for a life of combat, and propaganda films glamorized the war.
My father hated the imperial system before the war and spoke out against it.
Because of his unpopular opinions, Nakazawa's father was sometimes arrested, imprisoned, and beaten. As the war dragged on, Hiroshima, like other cities, grew weary. Equipping troops overseas created serious shortages of food and commodities. Citizens gave up their pots and pans to provide metal for producing arms. Then fear gripped the people as increased Allied bombing drove them to the safety of shelters. Yet most silently endured these hardships and supported the military cause promoted by their warlords and endorsed by their emperor. On August 6, 1945, Nakazawa was an elementary school student. As this animated version of his story shows, he was watching a plane fly overhead when someone stopped to ask him a question.
Then I saw a flash and lost consciousness.
He had been standing beside a concrete wall, which helped shield him from the blast.
When I woke up, everything was black. On top of me was concrete, cloth, and wood. A nail pierced my cheek and blood streamed down my face. I got out from under the debris and found the person I had spoken to. She was lying a few feet away, completely charred black.
Koko Tanimoto Kondo was one of Hiroshima's youngest survivors. She was only 8 months old when she and her mother escaped from the bomb-blasted parsonage of this church.
my mother was talking to this person, and she was carrying me inside of her arm. Then 8:15, the whole house crashed. So she was, under the house. Of course, she asked for help. No one came. Suddenly, the baby inside of her arm stopped crying. That's me. Because I couldn't breathe. She knew she had to do something.
Her mother managed to break a hole through the roof. She pushed Coco through and crawled out after her.
When she saw the house, the fire really started coming. So we really barely made it.
Masayoshi Sasaki had arrived the night before the bombing to visit his parents. In 1945, he was a candidate for officer training school. As he was eating his breakfast at home on the outskirts of the city,
there was a blast and the pine tree on the south side of my yard suddenly flashed. Then the whole house crashed on top of me.
Sasaki escaped with minor injuries and began searching for relatives closer to the city center.
The roads were filled with rubble, so I walked over the roofs of collapsed houses. The sidewalks by the train tracks were full of dead bodies. I saw hundreds of bodies piled on top of each other, 20 or 30 deep.
As he entered the city, survivors fled from advancing fires. Skin melted off their arms and hung from their fingertips.
People were so badly burned, I couldn't do anything to help them.
Less than a mile from the bomb's hypocenter, Matsubara was one of those severely burned. Fortunately, she hit the ground seconds before the blast. She believes her friends were vaporized by the intense heat. When she regained consciousness, she had been blown 15 feet from her original position. Her dark clothes had burned off. Her white undergarments remained and miraculously protected her torso from burns. The rest of her body was seared and horribly swollen. Like many with severe burns, she turned to the river.
When I looked into the water, I found countless dead bodies are carried away by the water, some sinking, some floating. Some body had been badly hurt by something. Their intestines were exploded. Those things I saw, but I felt unbearably hot, so I jumped into the water.
The rivers also allowed rescue workers to enter the city by boat. Shoji Harada was one of the first rescue workers on the scene. He helped transport survivors to the safety of neighboring islands and brought others to hospitals and makeshift clinics.
One time, I had to find a healthy mother to feed a baby. The original mother may have died. When I found the second mother, she was slightly injured, but she accepted the baby. Most people had that personality. Even though they were injured, they tried to help others.
Later, as rescue workers cleared roads and burned corpses, many contracted radiation sickness. They became feverish, lost their hair, and often died.
I saw many workers get ill. However, even though they were sick, they worked and worked and worked. I think this comes from the Japanese mentality to make a sacrifice.
Today, the rivers flow gently through a peaceful Hiroshima. Birdwatchers observe the waterfowl that thrive on the Ota River, and tourists stare at the amazing architecture that now dominates the city. It's hard to believe this high-tech metropolis was once the scene of the world's first atomic holocaust. Yet here, in this city of 1 million, where consumers shop in the most fashionable stores, where the etiquette of Japan's traditional tea ceremony is repeated in the formality of department store elevator ladies, where children play, and a father can afford to indulge the whims of his little girl. Survivors today still remember a burnt-out city and the difficult road to recovery.
I didn't want to draw about the bombing. I didn't want to remember it.
Nakazawa lost half his family that day. For 21 years, he kept silent about his experience. Then his mother died. When she was cremated, her sacred bones could not be enshrined with her ancestors according to custom. Radiation had caused so much damage, her bones had completely disintegrated. Nakazawa became so angry at this final loss that he decided to use his frightening memories to produce Barefoot Gen, a series of comic books that graphically depict the horrors of the bomb.
My mother was hanging clothes on the second-floor balcony when the blast knocked her clear of the house. Miraculously, she was not injured. But my younger brother Susumu, my sister Eiko, who was in the 6th grade, and my father were all inside when the house collapsed.
The three of them became trapped as surrounding fires advanced.
Susumu's body was free, but his head got caught between beams as the house collapsed. "Mother, I'm hurting. Can you help?" he cried. My father yelled for help from deep inside the wreckage. Eiko must have died instantly. She made no sound. My mother pulled frantically at the wreckage as fires from surrounding houses closed in, but there was nothing she could do to free them. As fire swept towards the house, she began to lose her mind. She sat beside Susumu's legs, prepared to die with her family, but a neighbor helped carry her away. She could still hear her son screaming, "Mother, do something, it hurts," and her husband yelling, "Can't you get me out of here?" They were still screaming as the house burned. She heard those voices every day for the rest of her life.
Nakazawa said readers were first appalled and disgusted by his graphic illustrations. But those who had actually lived through the bombing identified with the horror. They started a following. Soon the books became a tremendous success, and Keiji Nakazawa became famous throughout Japan. For Nakazawa, the tragedy of the atomic bombing had galvanized his mission as an artist.
I continue to use my work to influence the governments of Japan and the United States, so they will truly understand what nuclear weapons can do to men. I have done this for 30 years and will continue for the rest of my life.
Recovery was particularly difficult for those seriously disfigured by the bomb. Michiko Yamaoka was a young woman with burns so serious that she was not expected to live.
At first, there was no medicine to treat burn victims. Cooking oil was applied to wounds. The oil attracted flies. So did the corpses throughout the city.
Soon, Hiroshima had an infestation of flies, and human flesh became a breeding ground for maggots.
My body had maggots at the time, but my mother took care of me. Now I am alive because of her.
Thick, fibrous scar tissue called keloids also appeared over the wounds of victims, causing further disfigurement.
I found my face in the mirror. 8 months later, it was disfigured beyond all recognition. I couldn't believe it was my face.
Scarred women like Yamaoka and Matsubara were treated as outcasts by other Japanese.
"You are Yamaoka-san," my friend said to me. "You look like a monster."
Horrible keloid kept me from finding a job. It was so hard on me. No one wanted to sit next to me. No one wanted to marry me.
In that time of distress, both women found comfort at the Reverend Kiyoshi Tanimoto's church. Tanimoto was suspected as a spy during the war because of his Western religion and education. He helped launch the Hiroshima Maidens Project. The campaign brought 25 bomb-scarred women, including Yamaoka, to New York's Mount Sinai Hospital for extensive plastic surgery.
My feelings were very complicated when I visited the U.S. Now, 40 years later, I remember the kindness of those people. They brought my smile back to me.
I thought it was not right thing to travel to the United States. The country dropped the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. and Nagasaki. So I decided not to go to the United States.
Christian organizations in Tokyo and Osaka helped Matsubara receive plastic surgery in Japan, and she recovered the use of a damaged eyelid. Later, as she came to know more Americans through Tanimoto's church, Matsubara had a change of heart.
Gradually coming, trust and love the American, I realized that had we Japanese possessed the nuclear weapon, we might have used it. Therefore, their enemy is not America. It is war and those nuclear weapons.
We had no hopes, no desires. We only looked for food to survive. We'd go to rural areas. We looked like beggars. Eating was first priority. I ate frogs.
The bomb left 7,000 orphans, and each day was a battle against death. They tried to catch and eat the fish that were feeding on decayed bodies in the river.
I had to walk 20 kilometers to get rice. Rumor said it was dangerous to walk at night, so I carried a sword in case I met robbers.
There were many thieves in the city. Even when you had raised some vegetables to eat, next morning, you couldn't find them.
Concerned that hunger might turn Japan toward communism, General Douglas MacArthur ordered the Allied occupation forces to supply the starving population with rations.
Only the wise or clever were able to receive rations. I used to collect iron from the rubble and sell that for food.
We received rations, but they were barely enough to stay alive. Always we were hungry.
Akiko Takaki and her husband Shoji returned from the Asian front shortly after Hiroshima's bombing. Their family properties destroyed, they lived in temporary government housing and were as destitute as most survivors. Yet they found a unique way to feed themselves and develop a multi-million-dollar industry.
After the war, my husband believed that Japan would become westernized, including the way people ate. He believed that bread would be at the center of their diet.
At the time, few Japanese ate bread. Even fewer knew how to make it from the coarse Western flour they received in their rations. The Takakis didn't know how to make bread either, but they found a college student who taught them. In 1948, Akiko and her husband opened the Takaki Bread Shop and offered their customers a unique deal. Customers could bring in their ration of flour, and the Takakis would measure it and bake bread. As payment, the Takakis either received cash or a portion of the ration. This was a great option for people with flour rations, but no cash or means to bake bread. The business took off, and the Japanese became bread eaters, just as Shoji Takaki predicted. Today, Takaki Bakery is a brand name known all over Japan. They have branched out internationally and even opened a culinary art school in upstate New York. Yet Takaki Bakery maintains its headquarters here in Hiroshima, in a former bank, one of the few buildings that survived the atomic bomb. Today, at Hiroshima's Peace Memorial Museum, the history of Hiroshima's bombing is carefully preserved. Museum director Hiroshi Harada speaks for bomb survivors like himself.
We are the last to tell of the direct experience of the atomic bomb, and we are going to die. So we want to leave the experience to the younger generation, so that they will think about what they can do for peace.
But there is controversy over the way Japanese students are taught about the bombing and Japan's role in World War II.
The Ministry of Education in Japan has their own view of the war. They don't tell school children about the rape of Nanking or the Death March in the Philippines. The move into China is not aggression, but colonization.
Most of the Japanese youths interviewed said they did not learn about Pearl Harbor or Japanese aggression in school.
School never told me. One of my American friends told me.
However, recent changes in history books are presenting a more Western view of the war.
Pearl Harbor, it was unfair. I learned unfair because Well, our Japanese soldiers attacked American Pearl Harbor suddenly without a warning.
What impact does Hiroshima's history have on young people today?
We Japanese need to think about a future between Japan and America and forget the past. And that includes Pearl Harbor also, and atomic bombs. And every war, we have to forget. We need to forget.
I have kind of opposite opinion, and we need to remember. If we forget, we would make a mistake again, right? We should be disciplined by those memories. We shouldn't waste this sad experience.
For many survivors, the inability to forgive created the biggest obstacle to their own personal recovery. Coco Kondo remembers the bitter vow she made as a little girl.
These girls comes to church, but I don't know where to look because the face and hands, everything, disfigured. I said to myself, if the pilot on an Enola Gay airplane, if they didn't drop the bomb, these girls doesn't have to suffer. So as a child, I said to myself, someday when I grow, I'm gonna do something to revenge.
Coco got her chance sooner than she had expected. When her father, the Reverend Tanimoto, escorted 25 Hiroshima maidens to America to receive plastic surgery, he became the featured guest on the Ralph Edwards This Is Your Life program. Coco and her family were secretly flown to America to surprise her father on the show. Another surprise guest was Captain Robert Lewis, co-pilot of the Enola Gay.
I was so shocked because I really wanted to do something later in my life, but I never thought about I would meet him that soon. And of course, I didn't tell that to my parents because my father is a minister. If I tell them, they're gonna scold me. We didn't teach you to hate people. So I put everything aside. But on the stage, he was standing, and that's the guy, the bad one. I'm the good one. On the show called This Is Your Life, Ralph Edwards asked Captain Lewis,
would you tell us, sir, of your experience on August 6, 1945?
Well, Mr. Edwards, just before 8:15 a.m. Tokyo time, Tom Farabee, very able bombardier, carefully aimed at his target, which was the 2nd Imperial Japanese Army headquarters. 8:15 promptly, the bomb was dropped. We turned fast to get out of the way of the deadly radiation and bomb effects. First was a big flash that we got, and then the 2 concussion waves hit the ship. Shortly after, we turned back to see what had happened. And there in front of our eyes, the city of Hiroshima disappeared. I wrote down later, my God, what have we done?
right after he said, "Oh God, what have we done?" From his eye, I saw the tears. I was so shocked because until that moment, I thought he was a bad man. The people in Hiroshima City was everybody nice people. But I saw his tear, my whole attitude changed. I said to myself, and inside I said, "Oh God, please forgive me. I hated this man, but I shouldn't hate the man. People who are in Hiroshima suffer, but the person who I am playing, he suffered too." And while I was in the college, I wanted to see him, but he was in a mental institute. And so at that time, I really wanted to say thank you to him. It's because of him, my whole attitude changed. After he passed away, one of the psychiatrists show his sculpture. It was a mushroom cloud and one tear. So you can tell how deep he hurt.
Loss of family, disfigurement, loss of property, and innocence. The survivors of Hiroshima's atomic bomb all suffered terribly. Yet through the choices they made, they were able to put the past in perspective and find a new vision for their lives. Nakazawa's art has won him fame and fortune as he combined history and personal experience to teach millions about the bomb.
I would be lying if I didn't say I still hold some anger toward the Americans who dropped the bomb because of the thousands who died in such a horrible way. But I have more hatred for the emperor and the military dictatorship that started the war.
Though Matsubara still suffers from painful after effects of radiation, she and Yamaoka have discovered new identities as spokeswomen for peace.
War is carried out by nations, but it's the civilians who are victimized.
Especially, I like to say to the young people in the United States, nuclear weapon and the nuclear weapon do not deter war, and the nuclear weapon and the human beings cannot coexist.
The Takakis raised themselves out of poverty, produced wealth, and now provide education and jobs for hundreds of employees in Japan, Europe, and America.
We never thought of becoming a big success. We had no confidence, no time to think of the future. We were too busy working to survive.
And Koko Tanimoto Kondo received freedom from bitterness by forgiving the airmen who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Then, many years later, she met an American who survived the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor.
We really shake hands very tightly. We look at each other's face. We didn't say more than that, but we can feel each other's feeling. It's overcome already. Because we Japanese, there are so many things too. When you just pointed out that what you did that time, we cannot walk forward. We have to, forgive each other. And my father always told me, reconciliation. I think that's the only thing we can make this world peaceful.